All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks first for everyone attending today. We're really excited to present at DataWorks Summit. This is my second summit. This is the first time presenting. And so for today, what we're going to do is talk about ExxonMobil's journey of setting up a big data service and kind of what were our key lessons learned and our key activities. And our goal today is to kind of really share that information so you can take that into consideration as you go through your big data journey, whether you're thinking about Hadoop, you've started big data, or you're already on that journey and want a different perspective. One thing I wanted to highlight is I'd really ask for your feedback for the session. So at the end of the session, if you would please do the review marks so we could understand kind of what we could work on for next time. And so before we get started, I'd like to do just some brief introductions. And so first, my name is Nick Evans. I've worked for ExxonMobil IT. I've been with ExxonMobil for 15 years. I'm our big data service manager. And so what that means is I have a team of individuals that's responsible for our Hadoop and NiFi cluster. Next, I'll turn it over to Kevin.
Yep, my name is Kevin Brown. I've been with ExxonMobil for about 5 years now, and I'm our big data service platform engineer. And I've been mostly involved with our big data journey from the beginning from a technical standpoint.
I'm Wade Salazar. I'm a solutions engineer for Hortonworks. I've been working with Exxon since they started on their journey. Before coming to Hortonworks, I worked a lot in the oil and gas and industrial markets with industrial electronics and control systems. So working with Exxon has been kind of a natural fit for me.
Good deal. Thanks, Kevin and Wade. And so before we get started, I want to just talk a minute about ExxonMobil. And so most of you have probably heard ExxonMobil before. You may think of ExxonMobil as just a gas station, but really it's much more than that. We're the largest publicly traded oil and gas company. You know, our focus is really to use technology and innovation to help meet the world's growing needs of energy. If you think about developing countries, think about trying to improve their lifestyle, that multiplier needs more energy. And so that's what we're trying to provide. And kind of a question I'd ask you is, 1 gallon of gasoline, how long do you think you could charge an iPhone? Question to the audience. 10 years, okay. Somebody else? With 1 gallon of gasoline, you can charge an iPhone every day for 20 years. And so that kind of gives you an appreciation of the kind of density that the natural resources can provide to help meet these needs. And so if we think about ExxonMobil, we're really very broad of what we do, many different functions. And so we have to find these natural resources. We've got to develop. We've got to produce. We've got to then refine those into gasoline, chemical products, which are, end up being commercially available for plastics, et cetera. So a lot of the things that you use today are from oil. And so that's what we're trying to do is kind of meet that growing need of energy. And so each of these business functions are really companies within ExxonMobil, and they've got kind of their own business needs. And so our department is really providing a shared service. And so we're trying to provide a service across the entire corporation. So each of these separate functions. And so for us, these are really our customers. So if you hear me refer about customers later in the presentation, these are my business customers. And so that gives you a little bit of flavor of kind of what we're working with. And kind of for scale of ExxonMobil, we've got about 70,000 employees, and we work obviously globally. Okay, so if we start kind of big picture, what are our kind of key milestones along our big data journey? And what we wanted to highlight today is for each of these, we'll do a deep dive. And so we'll cover some of our key lessons, key takeaways, and what we'll do is I'll cover the first few. Kevin will cover the last couple, and then we'll have Wade provide some additional context, kind of how they've helped us along this journey. So to start, you have to kind of think back of kind of where we came from. Our team historically did data warehouses. And we did that for many years, and we're really very successful. And the business really appreciated what we did, but what we saw is that the industry was changing. The business was changing. Data growth was exploding. What the business was asking from us, from advanced capabilities, was difficult to meet with current technologies. And so for us, we had to assess, what else do we need to be doing? What's those additional technologies, skills, resources that we need? So we set on a capability study. And the first and most important thing for us to highlight is that you've got to start with understanding the business strategy. What is the business trying to appreciate? What are those difficult challenges they can't solve today? And if you start with that, I think you're going to have good success. Secondly, what we realized is that we don't have the answers. We needed help. And so for us, we got advice from a third party. So they kind of helped us educate, kind of gave us a better appreciation of what's possible. And so that kind of gave us a kickstart. Next, it was looking at what are our current skills, what are our current capabilities, and where are those gaps, but also where do we have great resources that we can leverage. And someone like Kevin today, he was identified early on and helped us on that journey. And so identifying those few key people early on that you can partner with is extremely critical. Next, as I talked about earlier, within ExxonMobil we have many different business lines. What we wanted to do is not provide a solution for a business line, but for the entire corporation. So for us, it was important of defining a service that would meet the entire shared service opportunity. And so that really gave us a guidepost for us to consider going forward. And then lastly, and kind of most important, is what's the potential prize? So if we do this, what's the return on investment? And for us, it was actually very clear that yes, we needed to invest in big data, and yes, there was a tremendous business opportunity. And so that got us excited to move forward, but in reality, we didn't know much about it. We needed to educate ourselves, so similar like some of you are here today trying to learn, that's what we did a couple years ago. We attended a big data conference. It was actually not this one, it was Strata, but it gave us an appreciation, and we brought a team of individuals there, and one key aspect that we did is we had the manager of our department attend as well. And so really we didn't know, what to expect, who's going to be there, but really we were blown away by the number of people there, the companies represented, and the use cases that they were solving real enterprise problems. And so what that helped us appreciate that is, okay, big data is real, it's enterprise ready, and its value is there from a generation perspective. And so that helped us want to move forward, but also energized my manager to say, yes, let's go do something. So that was critical for us to take that next step. And so I think his buy-in was important, but we really needed that higher level IT buy-in as well from a strategy perspective, especially if you think about ExxonMobil, very, very large corporation. And so for us, having that top-down strategy direction really kind of guides the process. That leadership drives the process. It helps us have kind of flexibility to operate, especially considering kind of new technology. We need resources across many teams, and so that helped us remove barriers and also helped us to move faster in some technologies that we would typically maybe get caught up in. And so you kind of think to yourself, that's important, but how do you get it? And for us, we had to first start with internally to our team is how do we educate ourselves? How do we make sure we understand what open source is? For us, we were mainly a shop that worked in proprietary technology. Open source was pretty new. Hadoop was new. And so we really had to understand what's the value proposition? Is it enterprise ready? Can we use this? And what we found is yes, it absolutely is. And also with that, understanding what are other companies doing and how are they leveraging that technology to help motivate our management from a kind of a competition perspective. Somebody else is doing this, they're achieving good value, we need to make sure we're doing that as well. And part of what was really successful in this is leveraging our partnership with Hortonworks, with Wade and Scott Fitzharris in the back there is, they helped bring both kind of industry and technology knowledge, and I'll let Wade talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, 2 years ago, Nick, like the rest of the industrial market sector, right? This was early in the adoption phase, right? And there wasn't a lot of people out there, consuming Hadoop at that point. And as you pointed out, open source was a significant departure from your traditional, software consumption model, right? So what we did, the first challenge was just helping you get your hands around how is open source different, and then what is the value proposition? Why would you want to do this in the first place, right?
Yep, absolutely.
So we've spent a pretty significant amount of time, not teaching you about the tech, but teaching about these fundamental principles about, where does the value come from? How is this different? What challenges do you expect to face? And all of those type of things, just to make sure that you were ready to go and sell internally and make sure that you get that management buy-in, right?
Absolutely.
Yep.
So that was really critical for us to be able to kind of have our management appreciate this different technology and kind of how it can be used and what the business opportunity is there. And if y'all were in the keynote this morning, one of the presenters talked about the 4 M's, make me more money. Well, I had show me the money on here too as well. And so that's what it comes down to is at the end, you have to describe that this is a value proposition. This is not just a technology tryout. If we can do this, we can either make or save money. And that for us was very critical for us to then say, yes, we've got that management buy-in, let's move forward. So now that we've got the management buy-in, we kind of had to understand, does this tech work? Does it work in our environment? And so, we looked at it, we said, you know what? We've got some pretty technical people. Let's just try Apache Hadoop ourselves. That's kind of hard. There's many moving parts and pieces, and what we realized pretty quickly is that our time is better spent on other key activities. Let's leverage a company that provides a distribution. Why is that important? First is enterprise readiness. For us, if we can't make an app enterprise ready, the business isn't going to use it. Secondly, provide that support. So, you're going to experience some challenges. You need to have that support to go along with you. Next is kind of what we talked about, giving us that expertise, that consultation that's really extremely critical. And then finally, with us not working much with open source, how do we help influence the community? We've got ideas, we've got suggestions, they can help do that. And then, once you decide that yes, you need a distribution, you need to kind of decide for yourself, what's that criteria for you that's important? You can see the ones on the screen here that I've listed of how do you want to define what distribution that you want to go with. And then once you have that distribution defined, it's, okay, how do I start installing this? And to my earlier point, yeah, we could do it ourselves, but really we wanted to move faster. And so for us, it was a more time to value of getting a professional services engagement to install quickly and for us to learn. One key aspect I would highlight is that when we did this, we had Kevin and team work with them. So as we're doing the installation, they're learning. And so next time we do an install, it's not PS, it's Kevin. And so that helped us really kind of move forward quickly, but also be prepared for the second round. Next one, this is one that we probably could have done a little bit better on, is you don't need to just do a tech evaluation, you need to evaluate the business case. And so don't just go see if the tech works, how does that business case work on the tech? And so that's one thing I want to highlight is making sure you've got a good business case defined to move forward. And lastly, HTTP was great, a great kind of data platform, but we had challenges. We have data at a data center, we had data on the edge, and that was difficult to get into Data Lake. So Data Lake is important, but you get all these sources. And so for us, it was looking at additional technology like NiFi, HDF, that would help complete the picture. So getting information from sources into the lake, kind of that ecosystem working together was really critical for us. And so that helped us then want to move forward and to now say, let's go do something. What's absolutely critical though is you've got IT management, you've got kind of tech, but you can't do anything without business sponsorship. And so I can't stress this enough, is that you've got to make sure that they're with you on this journey and they're almost driving it. And so part of that willing to drive you is you've got to really help educate them about not just the tech, but how the tech can be used to solve their problems, and kind of knowing those customers. Again, I'll let Wade talk about kind of how they helped us with that.
Sure. I mean, it's one thing to understand how a piece of technology works, right? But how that particular piece of technology is then going to apply to a certain business case, as you pointed out earlier, is really what's critical, right? So what drives early success, particularly in a shared service like this, is the team's ability to go sit down with a line of business and present not just value, but then start answering all of the questions that that line of business is going to have about how is this going to work, what's the end result going to work, how much investment do I need to do, how much, and so on, right? And some of that came from the members of the team, but then also we augmented a lot of that. We brought in industry professionals. You know, myself, I had a lot of experience working with a lot of the use cases that we had, and then more broadly, Hortonworks, you know, where, you know, there's, you know, 150 some odd of me out there working and seeing these use cases every day, and we could bring you, here's what's worked at other companies, here's what we're seeing in oil and gas more generally, right? And you know, that became a big enabler for some of those early projects that we worked on.
Absolutely, and I think that was absolutely critical. And kind of once you get the business sponsorship and you start these POCs, and you start kind of proving out things that they've never been able to do before. So they've had some business problems, and we've been able to show this is how you use the technology to answer those questions that you never even thought were possible. They will be your biggest advocate going forward. They will sell the technology for you. They're going to be happy to share their success stories, which will then bring other opportunities. And so that for us kind of confirmed, yes, we've got business sponsorship, yes, we've got IT support, and yes, we know that the tech works, but now we have to integrate it within our ecosystem. And so what I'll do next is turn over to Kevin and talk about kind of those aspects.
Thank you, Nick. Yep, so again, I'm coming more a little bit from the technical standpoint when I was working with this. And first of all, I was really excited to get to join a project that had some of this management buy-in and some of this leadership buy-in, because it got to, what it meant for the technical guy is that he got to do whatever he wanted. It was really nice. So one of the first things I want to talk about actually is skills and silos, or silos and skills. So the first thing that we're going to see here is when you have if you think about your data, if you have data silos, that's usually referred to as a bad thing. That's why people want to create data lakes, for example. It's the exact same thing with skills. If you got your skills trapped in a bunch of different areas and you have to work with lots of different teams and put in tickets and wait for tickets to come back in order to get anything done, it slows things down considerably. And as we've kind of mentioned before, Hadoop is a big thing. It's not a single tiny little application, but it's a platform. You've got 20 plus different applications. They're all integrated with different things, and there's really not a part of your IT infrastructure that it doesn't touch. So getting a team pulled together that is integrated, that has at least some of the main skills that you need internally, that way you don't have to reach out quite as much to get things done, is really helpful for us. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of those skills that you might want to be looking for. You know, Linux turned out to be a pretty big one, and that's kind of how I got involved. But again, we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a minute. Now, architecture and design. This is actually something I'm pretty passionate about. I love this piece. I love getting up on a whiteboard and drawing out the boxes and the arrows and seeing that big picture. That's how I think. I like to have that big picture in mind when I start to get into the details. The problem was we didn't know anything about big data when we started. I could get up on a whiteboard, but I couldn't draw anything that meant anything because I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know which questions to ask. And then when I started to think that I knew which questions to ask, I'd start answering that question, and then I'd just have 10 more questions. So what was helpful for us is to, again, have that partnership with a vendor that could answer some of those questions, or at least get us thinking about what kinds of questions we should be asking. In fact, if Wade, maybe you could help us with that a little bit.
Yeah. So all enterprise software has its architectural considerations that you have to deal with, right? Hadoop is further complicated by the fact that you have to make a decision: are we doing this on-prem? Are we going to do this in the cloud? Are we going to use a platform as a service, or just infrastructure as a service? Those types of things, and the fact that, you know, as you pointed out, it's not just one thing. There's 30 components just in the HDP stack alone, and there's probably 100 in the Gradier ecosystem that you have to take in consideration. You know, so as you look at a POC cluster, your architectural considerations to where you can have a lot of shared services on a few number of nodes is very different than when you start bringing in those initial use cases, and now you have to decide, well, do I need colder storage or hotter processing, all of these types of things. The nice thing that we were able to do with you is because we have, kind of these roadmaps. We see so many of these new customer adoption cycles, right? We have these roadmaps that we could essentially kind of fit to you and say, this is kind of what the growth pattern that we expect, until you get up into that point to where you had kind of a cluster that's kind of driving itself almost at that point. And you got much more comfortable making the architectural decisions yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I can't really emphasize how important that was for us and how helpful that was for us in that process. In fact, I think someone was talking about earlier today, you can come to a conference like this and you just have more questions afterwards. You heard several answers to the same question, and understanding which answer is best for your particular use case, that's something that that partnership can help you out with a lot. Now let's say you've got it all designed out and you're getting closer to actually installing something. Right? I feel like I keep on going back to this. You're not just installing a single thing, you're installing lots of things that all have to work together, and again, it touches every part of your IT infrastructure. I don't want to scare you away too bad. There really are lots of great tools to help this installation process go smoothly. You're working with a GUI, it's automated, but there's a lot of setup that you got to do beforehand, and you got to have the right pieces and skill sets internal to your team in order to do this effectively. And even so, I'm going to make at least one really big recommendation. This is probably something that at least the first time you don't want to do alone. You either want to have already hired someone that's comfortable doing this kind of stuff, or at least do a short-term engagement, like a professional services engagement with someone like Hortonworks to help you through that process, at least for the duration of your installation. If you do that, you'll find, one, you're going to learn a lot in the process of getting that set up, and you're going to feel more comfortable in the future. And then also, it's just going to help build that relationship further, so that way when you do have questions or things that are going wrong, you kind of know what to ask about and where to go back to get some help on it. After you've installed, or actually probably during your installation, I'm going to recommend that you do this during your installation at least, is your security. If you say something like Kerberos around a Hadoop admin, or a first-time Hadoop admin at least, it's probably a dirty word, and it makes them cringe a little bit. So I'm going to say that with the security piece, do that during your installation and probably with some help. But even if you have the world's best security expert there helping you do your installation, he's not going to be very helpful to you unless you have someone that understands your internal security really well as well. What that means is someone that's got a pretty good knowledge of how your LDAP is set up, how your Active Directory is set up, how your domains and forests are set up, how we authenticate with those systems, and how we pass around Kerberos tickets. Someone that's going to understand just Kerberos in general, KDCs, and then certificates. Everyone does their certificates a little bit differently, so understanding how to get certs, how to request them, how to install them, how to get key stores, trust stores, how to make those things interact with each other. It's going to be critical that you have that inside knowledge. So that was another piece that I thought I knew pretty well until I started working on this, and I found out I had a lot to learn. And I did learn a ton in the process, and it was really, really useful. But those pieces are going to be key for you. So start thinking about early on, who is that person that's got a good understanding of those things? If you're lucky, your Linux guy is going to have a pretty good start on that already. Now going forward from there, we've talked a lot about installation, getting your security set up. Now we've got a cluster. We need to start supporting it and using it. Let's go back. So upgrades. While you were doing your architecture and design, while you're doing your installation, while you're doing security, you probably noticed that another version or two versions of HTTP got released sometime during there. And then the starting time to upgrade. And you might think, oh man, we just finished doing all this, now we've already got to change it. That might be scary for you. What I'm going to recommend early on, is that you get familiar and get comfortable with doing upgrades for a few different reasons. Probably one of the biggest ones being, they're way, way, way easier than doing installations. We were actually very pleasantly surprised about how quickly and how easily the upgrades went. Two, you're going to find that the open source world moves very, 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 very quickly. You're going to have developers that are asking things that were just released about 10 minutes ago. They're going to want it right then. You got end users that want more stability or more performance, and all these things, you're going to get those, and the quickest way to get them is staying on board and up to speed with your upgrades. Another thing, and this, hopefully for not everyone this is a huge problem, but if you're a big company, it's probably at least somewhat of a pain area. But there's public repositories out there that have lots of stuff that you need. And in the open source world, they're maybe looked at from your company as something that's not super secure. and trying to figure out how to get access to those repositories where you need them. And I'm not talking about just Hadoop, right? Again, you've got 20 plus different applications, so you want repositories that allow you to install those things on all of your nodes. But also your developers are now going to be working with a lot of open source libraries in order to get things done. So having a good environment set up so that they can easily get access to the stuff that they need that is up to date, and so you can get access to your repositories so they continue to go forward, especially with those upgrades, it's going to be really important for you. Now, team roles. We talked a little bit. We keep on going back and forth on this. I think I've already made it clear that it's really nice if you can have someone that has a good, solid internal Linux skill set, an internal security set as well. And that's going to be one of the main people that you're going to need. But there's also going to be some resources that you may or may not already have internal to your company. One of those is going to be someone that just has general Hadoop administration skills, right? I could do my best to learn those things, but I found it was really helpful to have someone kind of sitting with me that already had some of that experience, and I was able to learn a ton from that person. And then also, they're able to learn from me about how we do things internally. So we really feed off of each other quite well. So you've got your Hadoop guy / internal guy, and hopefully, that's not going to be more than 2 people, and if you're really lucky, it's going to be 1 person. But you're also going to need someone that's got the data engineering skills. So I'm talking about a skill set that involves Hive, HBase, how to get things into those tables, how to store them correctly so they're performant. And then lastly, you've got your data science guy. Now, this is going to be a data developer. He might be just doing more simple BI, but it's really understanding how to work with your data sets and program your workflows to do things that are meaningful to the business. And then also potentially some more advanced analytics as well. And again, you probably don't already have all of those skill sets internally. And so for us, it was really useful to work with someone like Wade in the beginning of that process, and they've actually got a lot of things that are there to help out with that.
Yeah, the 3 roles that you pointed out, I mean, those were the absolutely critical ones, right? But those are the ones that you can plan for by and large up front. There's many other roles that have to get filled, right? And they're not all completely obvious. I pointed out a couple of the other ones. The evangelist that's going to help you understand open source and help you sell that internally, right? The architect that might be part of a PS engagement that you see 9 months down the road, but there's tasks that have to be kind of done up front. And a few other ones, as well. Again, those early success is driven by making sure that you have all of those roles filled at each step along the path. Right, working with experts in the field that can help supplement your own team, until you actually have trying to hire and train and then fill those roles yourself in a permanent fashion. You need someone kind of standing next to you, right, filling those roles and helping you along the way.
Right. Thanks, Wade. Now next, let's talk real quickly about multi-tenancy. That was a big one for us. From the very beginning, we knew that we were going to have lots of customers on this cluster, but there's still some lessons to be learned. Right away we gave, for example, full access to one particular business line, essentially because they were our only user at first, so it just made sense to give them all the access to everything. But then we found ourselves in a really interesting situation shortly thereafter, because all of a sudden we had a second customer coming in, and we needed to somehow tell our first customer, hey, we need to cut your usage to 1/10 or at least half. And we kind of set ourselves up for a failure there, or to kind of disappoint our customer. But the good news is there's lots of great tools to help you handle those situations. But if you think about them early, it's going to help you to not fall into that pit that we did. So be thinking about multi-tenancy, setting up your yarn queues and right sizing them. That way the customer has the right expectations going in. Because not only is that going to help get their expectations in the right place for the performance that they're going to have, but it's also going to help them to develop better workflows and better code so that they can work efficiently within those queues. And you can adjust those things and change them as you go, but it was good for us to see and know and understand that we really did have tools at our disposal to really control and keep people from stepping on each other's toes. And then another thing that was really useful in the multi-tenancy area is the security piece. So if I go back to the security piece really quickly, you really do have, with Ranger, a pretty good interface to go in and control security in lots of different ways. So you can slice and dice it and make sure that this company or this business line only has access to their stuff, and this business line only has access to their stuff. And that was really useful. And in fact, and it's on that same security piece, if you remember correctly, we're talking about how we're a little bit apprehensive with security, open source. A lot of that was because of security. We were a little bit nervous or afraid that maybe security in the open source world wasn't going to be that good. And we were actually pleasantly surprised. It was actually the opposite. When we started doing penetration tests and seeing how things held up against our standards, we found that even compared to some of our very proprietary third-party applications that were very highly regarded as secure, our Hadoop stack and platform was actually doing better than those things were in regards to those the security concerns. I think a lot of that has to do with these upgrades coming so frequently, and as things are found and problems are arising, they get addressed quite quickly. And the last thing I have here, which I don't want to discount too much, I really want to point out, is presentation layer. If you can't get your data back to your business in a way that's useful for them, all that work that you did up to that point is not going to mean nearly as much. And that's something that it's been a little bit of a pain point for us in some areas, is trying to understand, all right, well, this type of report needs to be done this way, this type of report needs to be more interactive, and we could find that, wow, we can go through billions of records and process it really fast, it only takes 30 seconds, but we put that inside of a user interface, and something takes 30 seconds. It doesn't matter how amazing that really is, to them it's gonna be garbage because it's too slow. So you need to be thinking about which data source you're going to use and how you're going to present that data back to them, and make sure that you're giving them a good user experience. And there's lots of tools out there and ways and strategies to deal with that, but if you're not thinking about it early on, you might be surprised by the method that you took. And really that's it for our big data journey. So if I could maybe just ask a couple questions here at the end, and I'll give you some answers to those questions. Was it worth it? Are we glad we took this big journey? Absolutely, we are. Was it hard? It was, and we are seeing value today. Now with that, we'll go ahead and turn back the time to you guys. If you have any questions for us, we'll stay up on the stage for a few minutes, and you can ask us questions. We'll answer them right here. Sure.
So for a company like ExxonMobil, and the speed at which this whole ecosystem is moving, right? Was there some process or thought process through which you manage the speed at which innovation is being introduced within your environment?
So the question is, how are we managing or keeping up with how quickly changes are happening in the open source and Hadoop ecosystem? Is that?
Well, yes. I mean, it's not keeping up. It's basically slowing down because Exxon is a big enterprise, and you don't want the next shiny thing out there to be introduced into your environment because it's the next shiny thing.
No, that's a good question.
I think you guys have done a good job of, there are a significant number of people working within your environment that do play with the latest and greatest tools, right? Now they provide a little bit of guidance, and you have a philosophy of not introducing .0 releases into your environment.
Yeah,
which
that's
I think
what I was going to say, is that we do take a look at that. We don't take the very first release. We usually wait for that second. So there's usually some additional things that happen through that cycle that we want a little bit of wait on, but then we're going pretty quickly after that. And so, for us, we're thinking about, we should be upgrading twice a year probably. And that's probably quicker than what we've done in some of our proprietary technologies. So it was a shift for us in our thinking, but it was also making sure that we're not upgrading just when the next one comes out. So let's make sure it's a little bit vetted and it's been used, and then that helps us move forward.
If I could add, I've also noticed a little bit of a philosophy change within ExxonMobil since I've been there. And let's just say that our problem usually isn't adopting stuff too fast. And what I found is that there's been more and more willingness to take risks and take them quicker and fail faster. And we think that, or I think that there's a lot of people even in the higher management that are starting to recognize that we'd rather take a risk and fail quickly than not take that risk at all and get way behind the curve, because that's also a failure. Yes, sir.
Can you talk about your ecosystem, like what else you have on top of big data platform for data ingestion, data preparation?
Yeah, so what we touched on earlier is, we're using some of the Hadoop tools for ingestion, like Scoop. We're also using HDF and NiFi. That's our kind of two primary ingestion tools. From the presentation layer, we're using a variety of kind of visualization tools, the ones that you're pretty commonly familiar with. And so that's kind of our current ecosystem that we've got. So we've got, HDF, some of the Hadoop tools like Scoop, obviously HTTP, and some of our visualization tools. And then we're also looking at kind of APIs for other applications to interact with our data as well. Yes, sir.
So how did you talk to your management about going through open source? Because a lot of concerns using open source, it's not supported and all that. How did you dialogue that, and what kind of answers did you put forward?
We told them it was free.
Yeah, so maybe I'll defer to Wade, and he can talk through some of the things that he helped us out with on that one.
Yeah, I mean, there's the obvious it's free part, right? And then the quick follow-up is nothing in life is free. And so it really came down to presenting the value. At the end of the day, ExxonMobil is an energy company, and I think more and more folks within the business started to realize that, yes, they could continue down the path of purchasing software and having very little influence in those ecosystems, right? To where they're just one customer of many. And they felt like there was an opportunity within the open source community to help drive some of these projects, right? And we're getting into that now. But then I think more critically with some of the key, early adopters within the business is they wanted to get out of the business of managing their own APIs, managing custom software that they were having to build for themselves, and actually transfer that to a community of folks. And so those are ongoing discussions, and then the value is starting to be realized now.
Yep, absolutely. Yes, sir.
So, how much help did you guys need from Portman after the cluster became operational? Like,
Yeah, sure. So the question was, how much work did we need after we installed the cluster? I would say we're doing really a combination of resources. I'd say about 50-ish, 50 of internal and kind of consultants. And so we've worked with a couple of companies to help us down that path. And I think that's probably going forward. We'll start to kind of lean towards more internal people to help augment that specialized staff. But also what I do like about the contract staff is that helps us ramp up pretty quickly if we've got additional project demand. I can't go hire people relatively soon and have Hadoop experience, but I can get very valuable Hadoop experts relatively quickly, and then they can help augment our team. But for us, it's important to make sure we have our internal staff knowledgeable as well. Thanks. Yep.
And you mentioned NiFi for like few times.
Mm-hmm.
How was your experience? How long you have been using? I know the newer version has more
Yep.
integrated features within the Ambari it can manage, but in the older version didn't have that. So how was your experience, and what kind of volumes you're able to get it through NiFi?
Yeah,
Could you
I
repeat the
can't talk.
question?
Yeah, so he's asking to talk about a little more our experience with NiFi and what volumes we're getting through it. I can't really go into too much detail about volumes of data going through NiFi, but what I can say is that we started using it pretty early on. It's like version 0.4, I think. And what I've loved about NiFi, one is when we show that to a customer or someone that we're working with, they love how easy it looks and really how easy it is. But we also found that, in that first version, there's lots of things like, wow, this is great, but I wish it did this. And then version 0.6 came out, and it did that.
Yep.
And I said, man, this is great, but the security piece is really lacking. Before we could really use this in a lot of places, we need a little bit better security. And the 1.0 came out, and it did that. So every version that's come out, it's gotten better and better. My experience, and people tease me at Exxon for being the NiFi guy. I'm like, anytime something comes like, oh, we can do that with NiFi.
Yeah.
And then I'll bang my head on it for a while and figure out that, okay, we're missing that one little piece, but then that little piece is available in the next version. I think HDF 3.0 just came out. There's a couple features in there that I know about specifically that I've been waiting for personally. So the experience has been very good.
Yeah, it has been.
And again, I can't talk about volume that's going through, but I think I can say pretty comfortably that we're leaning more towards HDF than anything else as far as ingestion goes.
Yeah, I would definitely second that. If we can get kind of HDF to really work well with relational data, I think HDF would probably be our primary purpose going forward. And so we've been very happy, and also I'd say from a security perspective of what you can do with HDF, that's critical for us, and they do that very well. Yep. Yes, sir? Okay, so the first question was what was the size of the data that we're working with, And the next one was around,
Millions of the records that the auditor couldn't touch.
yep, okay,
The SLA requirements only require 30 seconds. of
sure.
recording.
Yeah, so the next one was kind of what are kind of SLA requirements to kind of help meet kind of that volume of data.
Or how we're getting from those 30-second queries down to something more usable for those interfaces, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
So I can't unfortunately give you specifics about the volume of data, but I would say what we worked with our business on is really understanding kind of what's that question that they're asking. Do they need that full data set? In most cases, they don't, right? And so it's defining kind of what's that output that they can then interact with, and then working with them to understand, what's a feasible SLA. You can't expect to have a question of, let's say 10 billion records and have an answer back in 2 seconds. It's not really feasible. And so what we try to do is work with them to understand what do you really need and what's that SLA. And there's a little bit of give and take there, but most cases we can kind of get down to that and still try to help them appreciate, don't forget, you couldn't do this at all before, and you can now get this answer now. So that's what we try to do. Okay, all right. Guys, thank you. She's cut me off. I will be off the stage. Happy to answer additional questions after that. Thank you.